In the military, there are places where the truth is hidden, where darkness isn't just the absence of light, but also a dwelling place for nameless entities. One such place is the smoke pit, a makeshift hidden corner where soldiers gather, cigarette smoke mingling with whispers about things no one dares speak of openly. The smoke pit isn't just a few pieces of wood or stacked sandbags at a desert outpost, nor just the cold concrete area outside Hansen Barracks, Okinawa. It's a place where time seems to stop, where stories of skinwalkers, ghosts, or UFOs are told in the dark, under the flickering light of a cigarette. I once heard an old soldier say, "In the smoke pit, you don't just inhale smoke, you inhale fear too." Nowadays, when smoking bans within the barracks force soldiers to seek out hidden corners, the smoke pit becomes a sacred space. No officers, no discipline, just soldiers and the secrets they carry from the battlefield. Once, I recorded a sergeant's words. "I saw it, Professor." Its eyes were blood red, standing outside the base fence. Not human. But the smoke pit isn't just a place for storytelling. It's where supernatural mysteries converge, as if drawn by human fear. Stories of ghosts, curses, or soldiers vanishing without a trace are only told here, because elsewhere, they'd be silenced by ridicule or prohibition. Those entities know where humans are most vulnerable. In the military, speaking of supernatural phenomena during work hours is taboo. An official report about a monster or a ghost could destroy a soldier's career. I was fortunate enough to once read a classified file. A lieutenant reported ghostly laughter in the woods near Kandahar, only to be sent for psychological evaluation and never promoted. "They want us silent," he whispered to me before disappearing from the military. Therefore, the smoke pit becomes the only place for terrifying stories to be unleashed. Under the dim light of a flashlight or the moon, soldiers tell of what they saw. A faceless figure gliding through the trenches, a hiss from the void, or a comrade being dragged away in the fog. I could feel the fear in their voices. Not fear of the enemy, but fear of the unexplainable. For the storytellers, these experiences aren't just memories, but scars etched deep in their souls. I once met a Marine, eyes bloodshot, recounting seeing a tall, hairy thing standing in the Iraqi desert. "It wasn't Bigfoot, Professor. It knew my name," he said, trembling. These stories, whether the listener believes them or not, carry an obsessive weight. In my research journey, I have compiled stories from smoke pits around the world, from the deserts of Afghanistan to the jungles of Okinawa. Today, I will tell you two special stories. One from Sergeant M, who faced a ghostly mystery, and one from Trip, a Marine haunted by what he saw at a fateful smoke pit. The first story comes from Sergeant M, who shared it with Eric and Laura Rutan of Paranormal Scholar, a couple I respect for their efforts in documenting anomalous phenomena. M told of a CQ duty shift in 2015 when he had to confront a soldier suspected of practicing black magic in an entity not belonging to this world. The second story is from Trip, a comrade of the original narrator who met at a smoke pit in Okinawa. Trip once recommended the book Tales from the Grid Square by Nick Orton, a work I consider the Bible of military supernatural phenomena. "You have to read it, Professor Cole," Tripp said, his voice low as if afraid someone might overhear. "What I saw, it's not just stories. The world is small, and perhaps it's no coincidence that Tripp's story begins right at the smoke pit, where darkness always seems to lurk. I feel a chill every time I think of that place, as if something is watching from afar, waiting for a moment of human vulnerability." In 2015, Sergeant M took the CQ duty at a remote barracks. The shift lasted 24 hours, from 9 a.m. to 9 a.m. the next day, with only him, an old wooden desk, and the enveloping darkness. "I hate this shift," M muttered to his buddy before starting. His duties were to patrol, maintain order, and monitor the high-risk soldiers confined to barracks. But no one told him. That night, the thing needing supervision wasn't human. CQ duty seemed simple. Read a book, watch a movie, or walk around the barracks to ensure no one broke the rules. But around 2 a.m., as M was patrolling, he heard a strange hissing sound from the abandoned warehouse area. "Anyone there?" he yelled, but only the echo answered. I later learned the warehouse was the site of a mysterious suicide years prior. CQ duty also included monitoring high-risk soldiers, those restricted due to dangerous behavior. That night, M was assigned to watch a young private, known as C. Rumors circulated that C practiced black magic, and his roommates had seen strange symbols carved on his bed. "Don't get near him," a soldier warned M. "He's not normal." I suspect C had accidentally summoned something beyond his control. High-risk soldiers aren't just complex psychological cases. Sometimes they carry something darker than darkness itself. Some soldiers face not only mental crises, but also serve as gateways for entities not of this world. The military is a crucible, attracting all types of people, from steadfast warriors to strange individuals who send chills down others' spines. Sergeant M, a dedicated soldier, once told me, "I love this country, but sometimes I wonder why they let people like that carry a gun." The harsh truth is that not everyone belongs here. Eccentric individuals reveal themselves right from boot camp. Some whisper to themselves in the dark or stare into the void as if seeing something. I once heard a story. A recruit was kicked out for drawing strange symbols on the walls, whispering it told me to do it. Most are weeded out, but some still slip through the cracks. Sergeant M suspected that recruitment pressure sometimes made recruiters turn a blind eye. "They need numbers, not quality," he told me bitterly. But boot camp is where the truth comes out. Hidden mental issues surface, and some realize they can't handle the pressure of military life. The scary part is you can't just leave. The contract is signed, and the only way out sometimes involves desperate actions. I once read a report about a recruit jumping from the 3rd floor, muttering about a dark shadow following him. People like that are cuffed to hospital beds, under 247 surveillance, until they disappear from the system. But Sergeant M's story isn't about boot camp failures. It revolves around a strange soldier, one who passed every test to reach his unit but brought a darkness that chilled the entire barracks. "That guy wasn't human," a comrade whispered to M. "He was something else." The private, called C, was a living nightmare. For 20 months, he never got promoted, a rare record due to constantly causing trouble and defying every rule. The anger inside him was like an unquenchable fire, and his gaze made others feel pierced through. I suspect C wasn't just unstable, but haunted by something supernatural. Rumors spread that C practiced black magic. Comrades spoke of strange whispers from his room at night, of symbols drawn in blood on the floor. "I swear, I saw him talking to the corner of the room," a soldier told M, trembling. Rituals like these can open doors to terrifying dimensions. When C was finally discharged, his room became a horrifying legend. Sergeant M, along with the company commander and the supply sergeant, went in to inspect, and what they saw, they would never forget. "It smelled like a dead body," M recounted. "But what scared me was the stuff hanging from the ceiling. The toilet in the room had been broken for a long time, but C still used it, leaving a disgusting, foul-smelling pile of waste. The closet was filled with trash and rotting food, as if he intentionally hoarded decay. The sink, refrigerator, even the shower were full of soaked garbage, emitting a stench that made one want to vomit. I believe this filth wasn't just laziness, but part of a dark ritual. But what left the inspection team stunned were the chicken bones hanging from the ceiling. Tied with string, arranged in shapes resembling ancient symbols, they emanated the chilling feel of a morbid ritual. "Who does this?" the supply sergeant yelled, but M just stood still, feeling a cold draft run down his spine. These symbols resembled summoning sigils from ancient occult lore. The room wasn't just a mess, it was an altar to darkness. I suspect C had tried to summon something, and perhaps he succeeded. When we left the room, the hallway lights flickered, M recounted. I swear I heard laughter from the darkness. C's story didn't end when he left. It left a curse haunting the barracks. When Sergeant M and the officers entered Private C's room, they counted about 24 clusters of chicken bones hanging from the ceiling, tied with old twine, swaying like trapped souls. The revulsion made them pause, afraid to touch them. These objects weren't just decorations. They were invitations to something from another realm. The floor was covered in a thick layer of black dust, as if it hadn't been cleaned in years. In the center of the room, a circle of half-burnt candles formed a mysterious arc, the dried wax forming dark red streaks, evoking images of dried blood. I suspect this circle wasn't just ceremonial. It was a portal, drawn with dark intent. All the furniture in the room was pushed into a corner or crammed into the closet, as if someone had deliberately cleared space for a horrific ritual. Who could live in a place like this? The supply sergeant muttered, his voice trembling. Sergeant M just shook his head, feeling a cold draft on his neck, as if someone was breathing right behind him. The stench in the room was a nightmare, a mix of rotting garbage, waste, and a foul metallic odor, like old blood. It didn't just make one nauseous, it stirred a primal fear. This smell, it's not normal, M whispered to me later. I believe that smell was a sign of a summoned supernatural entity. The room's condition wasn't just evidence of personal squalor, it confirmed the rumors about C's black magic. Every corner emanated unease, as if the air was weighed down by an invisible curse. This room felt more like an altar than a soldier's living space. Sergeant M, despite being nearly 30 and having brushed with the occult in his youth, couldn't hide his unease. He tried to reassure his comrades. These chicken bones and candle circles, amateur stuff, like kids messing with crappy magic books. But his voice dropped, almost to a whisper. But the air in here, it feels wrong. I feel like something's watching me. No one wanted to stay in that room a second longer. The feeling of being watched, like hundreds of invisible eyes from the shadows, made them leave hastily. "Get out of here now," the company commander ordered, his voice strained. Many soldiers have reported similar feelings in places contaminated by dark rituals. Command quickly called a professional cleaning crew, ordering every trace of the room removed. After several days, the room was spotless, as if never defiled. But I know, supernatural things aren't easily washed away with soap and water. The room might be clean, M said, but the curse isn't. In the months after C was discharged, soldiers on CQ duty began whispering about strange sounds from the empty room. Heavy footsteps, hissing like ghostly laughter, and sometimes a faint smell of burning plastic despite no electrical source. One report read, "Heard knocking from room XXX. Checked, found nothing. Burning smell but source unknown." Those reports were often dismissed as new soldiers' pranks, but they matched descriptions of residual haunting phenomena, traces of an entity still lurking after the ritual ended. "That thing didn't leave," M noted. "It's waiting." A few months later, Sergeant M was assigned CQ duty on a cold Thursday night. The barracks were nearly empty. Most of the unit was out for field training. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the ticking clock and the wind whistling outside the window. "I don't like tonight," M told his assistant, his voice filled with unease. Their duty desk was just half a hallway from the infamous room, close enough to hear any sound clearly. M and his assistant, a young private named Jake, were checking the duty log when a horrifying roar erupted from the room. It sounded neither human nor animal, a deep, vibrating sound, as if from another realm. What the hell was that?" Jake yelled, dropping his pen. The roar made M's heart stop. He felt a cold wave wash over him, as if the room itself was breathing. "Stay here," M ordered, but his voice trembled. That roar was the sign of an entity summoned by C, now trapped in the room, angry and hungry. The roar from the room was unlike any sound on Earth. Not animal, not mechanical, but a chaotic blend, like tearing metal mixed with distorted screams played backward. Sergeant M described it as a scream from hell, making his heart momentarily stop. The assistant, Jake, tremblingly said, "It was like a car crash, but without a beginning or end. Just horrific noise, sharp as a knife." The sound sliced through the barracks' silence, leaving a primal fear, as if something had just breached this world. As the higher-ranking NCO, Sergeant M tried to suppress his fear. He took a deep breath, turned to Jake. "You stay here. Call Lieutenant LNO. Tell him to get here now. I'll go check." His voice was firm, but I recognized the tension in M's eyes. He knew he was about to face something beyond comprehension. Jake nodded, his hand trembling as he picked up the communication device. Sergeant M had him call the LNO liaison officer for the master key, the only thing that could open the door to the notorious room. Events like these often occur at night, when supernatural energy is strongest. 5 minutes later, Sergeant M and Lieutenant LNO stood before the cold steel door. Jake remained at the desk, eyes glued to the dark hallway. As the master key turned in the lock, a dry click echoed, as if the door was warning them. "Ready?" LNO asked, but his voice cracked. M just nodded, tightening his grip on the flashlight. The door barely cracked open when a blast of icy air hit their faces, carrying the stench of dead animals and burning plastic. It wasn't just decay. It was the smell of wrongness, as if the room exhaled the breath of a malevolent entity. "What the hell is this?" LNO muttered, trying to cover his nose. The room was spotless. No dirt, no furniture, no electrical appliances. But the stench lingered, as if seeped into the very bricks. They checked every corner, but found nothing. I suspect this cleanliness was a trap, a way for the entity to conceal its presence. Though they saw nothing, both M and LNO felt an invisible pressure. "Do you feel that?" M whispered. "Like someone's watching us." LNO nodded. The feeling of being watched is a sign of a supernatural entity observing, waiting for a moment of human vulnerability. Unable to find the source of the roar or the smell, they decided to leave. "Forget it," LNO said, his voice trembling. "Empty room, nothing there. Reporting this will just get us labeled crazy." Sergeant M nodded, though deep down, he knew the truth was far more terrifying than what they saw. M stepped into the hallway first, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. LNO turned back to pull the door closed, but at that very moment, a horrific force slammed the door from the inside. The impact resounded, strong enough to throw LNO off the threshold, sending him sprawling onto the floor. The door slammed shut, shaking the entire hallway. "What was that?" M yelled, spinning around, heart pounding. LNO, pale-faced, muttered, "The window? Was a window open?" But they both knew no windows were open. That force couldn't be natural. It bore the mark of an angry entity trapped in the room. The barracks were equipped with hydraulic door closers, designed to prevent slamming. To generate such force, someone would have had to destroy the hydraulics or use supernatural strength. But the door had worked normally when they opened it. No wind, nothing, M told me. So what the hell did that? Instinctively, LNO scrambled up, trembling hands inserting the master keycard into the reader, determined to reopen the door. "I have to see what's in there," he yelled, his voice strained with fear and anger. Sergeant M grabbed his shoulder, trying to stop him. "Don't, Lieutenant. Don't open it." But LNO's eyes were already clouded by deadly curiosity. That door wasn't just an object. It was a boundary between this world and another dimension. What slammed it wasn't wind, wasn't human, but an entity summoned by C's ritual, now seeking escape. They opened the door at the wrong time, I noted, and perhaps they awakened something that should have slept. The master keycard was suddenly useless. The indicator light flashed red repeatedly, as if the door was locked by an invisible force from within. Sergeant M and Lieutenant LNO tried again and again, but the cold steel door wouldn't budge. "What the hell is this?" LNO muttered, his voice trembling. What locked the door wasn't mechanical. It was the will of a supernatural entity. After several failed attempts, they looked at each other, fear evident in their eyes. "Let it go," M said, his voice dropping low as if afraid of being overheard. They turned their backs, walking quickly away from the dark hallway, not daring to look back. The decision to give up wasn't just fear of ridicule. Deep down, they knew they had touched something they shouldn't have. They agreed not to report the incident. Who would believe a story about a roar from an empty room or a door slamming shut on its own? "Report this, and we'll be sent to psych," LNO said bitterly. Sergeant M nodded, but inside him, unease simmered like an unquenchable fire. In the following days, living in the barracks, Sergeant M always listened intently. The terrifying roar never returned, but the room's silence was even more frightening. He frequently glanced down the hallway leading to the room, as if expecting something to burst from the darkness. One night, during another CQ shift, as the barracks lay quiet, M heard rustling from the empty room. It sounded like shuffling feet, slow, as if someone was moving silently in the dark. "Do you hear that?" his assistant whispered, face pale. M ordered, "Ignore it. Don't go near that room, understand?" M never checked the room again. He ordered all CQ personnel to stay away from it, as if that door was a gateway to hell. I suspect the entity in the room wasn't just present, it was waiting, patiently, for a new victim. To this day, no one knows exactly what happened in that room. Sergeant M isn't sure if the military ever allowed another soldier to use it, but he told me, his voice full of certainty, "If anyone has to sleep in there, I wouldn't want to be them. That room, it's cursed, Professor. Something is still there." The next story shifts to another soldier, Trip, a Marine with equally haunting experiences. I had heard about Trip during smoke pit sessions, where he was mentioned as a talented storyteller, bringing the darkness of the battlefield into every word. After leaving the military, Trip pursued art, painting, and writing, as if trying to exorcise horrific memories. He is the author of Smoke Pit Fairy Tales, a series I highly regard for its blend of military life with dark fantasy. It's not just fiction, I noted. It's Trip's way of confronting what he saw. Smoke Pit Fairy Tales follows two American soldiers, Hank and Doc, trapped in Afghanistan, who become immortal after a mysterious event. They lived through World War III, facing aliens in post-apocalyptic adventures. I noticed this story reflects Tripp's obsession with the supernatural phenomena he witnessed. You can find Tripp's books on Amazon or smokepitfairytales.com, where the first book is available to read for free. He also runs the YouTube channel Tripp's Smoke Pit, reading his audiobooks himself, his deep voice full of haunting undertones. Listen to Tripp narrate, and you'll feel the darkness in every word. Soldiers who witness strange phenomena often get drawn into the supernatural world. Tripp was no exception. What I saw in Afghanistan, it changed me, Tripp once said. Those experiences pushed him to explore things beyond reality. Since he owned recording equipment, Tripp recorded his own story. Listening to Tripp's recording, I felt a chill. His story isn't just a recounting. It's a doorway into a world where darkness is vivid, where nameless entities stalk the battlefield's night. What did Tripp see? I wondered. And why won't it let him go? Hey everyone, I'm Tripp Ainsworth. Tripp's voice came through, initially hesitant but quickly gaining confidence. I write smoke pit fairy tales, paint, and used to be a Marine. But tonight, I'm going to talk about things not of this world. I sensed the haunting quality in Tripp's every word. Tripp was stationed in Okinawa with Luke, the original narrator in the 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit. We used to hang out at the smoke pit, talk about everything, he told me, from the battlefield to ghost stories. Luke was always curious, but I had seen them. Those conversations, I believe, awakened dark memories within Tripp. I'm no prophet or psychic, Tripp chuckled slightly. But after 12 years in the Marine Corps, I'm sensitive to, let's call it, the darkness. I've seen things nobody wants to believe. Soldiers like Tripp often develop a special sense, as if the darkness has chosen them. Tripp's first story begins in his teens, not on a battlefield, but in a cold storage warehouse in Jacksonville, Florida. I was 13, working a summer job for my dad, he recounted. That place had a ghost everyone knew about. They said he just swept the hallway behind the freezer, over and over, like a lost soul. According to rumors, a worker fell from a catwalk and died during the warehouse's construction. They said he never harmed anyone, Tripp told me. Just swept the floor, stuck in an eternal loop. I recognize this as a form of residual haunting, leftover energy from a tragedy. Non-sentient but deeply unsettling. One early morning, Tripp arrived at the warehouse before opening, while his dad took inventory. I was there alone, looking for a case of crab legs in the freezer section, he said, his voice slowing. Then I looked up, and right next to me, a man was sweeping the floor, pushing a large push broom. He was there for half a second, then vanished. Tripp wasn't scared. I'd heard too much about him. He chuckled softly. I just thought, oh, so it's real. Then went back to work. I was surprised by Tripp's calmness, but he believes that encounter opened a door in the 13-year-old's mind, leading him to greater mysteries. Between that ghost sighting and his next supernatural experience were years in the military. Tripp served 2 deployments in Afghanistan and 1 float with the 11th MEU on a Westpac tour. I heard plenty of spooky stories, he recounted, about skinwalkers, about figures in the desert, but I hadn't seen anything until I got back. After his 3rd deployment, Tripp, now a sergeant, lived in the barracks at Camp Margarita, Camp Pendleton. That's when things changed, he told me, his voice dropping. I sensed a shift in the narrative, from youthful curiosity to a deep-seated haunting, forged by war and darkness. I don't look for these things, Tripp whispered, as if afraid of being overheard. But they find me. Soldiers like Tripp often become beacons for supernatural entities, attracted by the psychic scars of the battlefield. Tripp's story isn't just a memory, it's a warning. What Tripp saw in the cold storage was only the beginning. Later experiences in the military changed him forever. Tripp isn't just telling stories. He's trying to understand what has haunted him for years. Smoke Pit, Fairy Tales, Tripp's book series, is his way of confronting the darkness. I read them and noticed each story breathes the essence of what Tripp witnessed, from Afghanistan to Pendleton. It's not just fantasy. It's Tripp's way of keeping the fear from consuming him. Tripp began his story with haunting sincerity. "All right," he said, his voice resonating in the recording. "I'll tell you about the first time I felt true darkness. Not a ghost, not a rumor, but something that made me know this world isn't as simple as we think." Listening to Tripp, I felt a cold dread creep up my spine. I knew the coming story wouldn't just be a memory. It would be a doorway into a hidden corner of the military, where nameless entities lurk, waiting for a moment of human vulnerability. I lived in the headquarters in service barracks, room number 316, I heard on the recording, sensing the weight Tripp placed on that number. That room, it was never normal. Every time I walked in, I felt like someone was watching me. Tripp continued. The hair on my neck stood up, like the darkness in the room was breathing. Places like room 316 often become supernatural hotspots, where entities from other dimensions seep into our world. Tripp spoke of strange nights. I often had sleep paralysis, waking up midnight, drenched in sweat, heart pounding. Felt like something heavy was pressing on my chest. He tried to dismiss it as nightmares, but deep down, he knew the room hid a terrifying secret. But there was one night. "I can't forget," Tripp whispered, his voice tight. I woke up, still lying in bed, but when I looked towards the corner of the room, I saw myself. I recognized this wasn't a hallucination, but the phenomenon of a doppelganger, a sign of supernatural interference. That me was talking to something. "The thing I still see in my nightmares," Tripp recounted, his voice trembling. The entity was nearly 7 feet tall, skin pale like a corpse. No hair, no ears, no nose, just a small slit for a mouth. It stood there, looking at me, as if it knew I was watching it. The entity wore a strange beige robe, like a turtleneck sweater, but long like a monk's habit, sleeveless, seamless. It wasn't like anything humans wear, Tripp described. That attire symbolized another dimension, the entity's origin. In the dream, or distorted reality, the false Tripp asked the entity, "Who are you?" It replied, its voice icy, but Tripp couldn't recall the name. "Where are you from?" he asked next. The answer chilled his blood. "Not here." I believe here meant not just the room, but our entire reality. "What do you want?" Tripp asked, his voice defiant. The entity replied, chillingly calm, "Just checking." This statement hinted at a deeper purpose. Perhaps the entity was searching for something or someone in this world. Suddenly, the entity turned, looking directly at the real Tripp, the one lying in bed. It knew I was there, Tripp recounted, his voice cracking. The small mouth slit opened wide, transforming into a massive jaw filled with razor-sharp teeth. This was the sign of a malevolent entity revealing its true nature. "Wake up!" the entity hissed, the sound like metal scraping stone. Tripp jolted awake, drenched in sweat, heart racing wildly. "I thought it was just a nightmare," he said. But the feeling, it was too real. I believe Tripp had accidentally opened a psychic doorway in room 316. Shaking, Tripp got out of bed, trying to get a glass of water to calm himself. I turned on the light, but the light didn't seem to dispel the darkness, he recalled. I realized room 316 wasn't just haunted. It was a supernatural crossroads where entities could breach the boundaries of reality. I never told anyone in the barracks about this, Tripp confided. Who would believe it? But after that night, I knew something was in room 316, and it hadn't left. I suspect the entity had chosen Tripp, marking him as a beacon for future supernatural phenomena. Tripp's story isn't just a memory, it's proof of entities beyond comprehension. Room 316 wasn't random. It was a hotspot, and Tripp, with his sensitivity, became a target for what lurked in the darkness. I didn't want to go back to that room, Tripp admitted. But I knew, wherever I went, that thing would follow me. I felt a cold dread. Tripp's story wasn't just a recounting. It was a warning about what hides in the shadows of military life. The moment my feet hit the floor, Tripp recounted, his voice filled with awe. The lights in room 316 turned on. The door and window flew open simultaneously, as if the room wanted to push me out. I recognized this wasn't random. The room was reacting, like a disturbed living organism. Tripp was lucky. He was about to transfer, escaping room 316. But for the remaining few weeks, I had nowhere to sleep, he said. I slept in my car. Better that than staying with that thing. Haunted places often drive people away, but sometimes the darkness follows. Years later, at the 29 Palms Barracks, Tripp faced a new phenomenon. I kept waking up in the middle of the night, he recounted, his voice lowering. There was something at the foot of my bed. A dark, hazy mass like smoke, shapeless. I recognized this as a shadow entity, a classic supernatural form, silent but menacing. Between the events in room 316 and 29 Palms, Tripp had witnessed many strange things. I read a lot about the supernatural, he told me. Not superstition, but to understand what was happening. I believe Tripp's curiosity made him a magnet for phenomena, like a lamp attracting darkness. The thing at 29 Palms wasn't scary, Tripp said, sounding slightly confused. It was just annoying, like it wanted me to know it was there. I noted that such entities sometimes aren't harmful, merely seeking attention, a reminder of their existence. One night, unable to bear it, Tripp left his bed at 2 a.m. I couldn't sleep, he recalled. I went outside the barracks, smoked a cigarette to calm down. There, he met George, a comrade also wandering in the night. "Why are you out here this hour?" Tripp asked. George just shrugged, his eyes filled with unease. The barracks were usually quiet then, but someone was always awake. Tripp told George about the shadow mass. "You see it too, right?" George whispered, his face paling. "But I see a strange creature, not a shadow. It stands there, looks at me, then disappears." I realized this similarity wasn't coincidental. The barracks were haunted. After their cigarette, they went back inside. Walking past the common room near the duty desk, Tripp recounted, his voice trembling again. "We saw a woman. She sat in a chair, hair golden like sunlight, her white dress so radiant it made them squint. She was glowing like she didn't belong there," Tripp said. "Do you see her?" Tripp asked George, heart pounding. George nodded, speechless. They looked back at the duty desk, then turned towards the woman. But she had vanished, as if she had never existed. I suspect this was a light entity, the opposite of the shadow figure. But her purpose remained a mystery. "We only talked about it a few times," Tripp told me. But there was no explanation. Who was she? Why was she there? Phenomena like these often occur where supernatural energy is strong, like the 29 Palms Barracks, where human minds are easily infiltrated. Tripp never forgot the woman's light, but it didn't dispel the darkness within him. After that night, I knew there was something at 29 Palms, he said. Not just a shadow, but a whole world hidden behind reality. I believe Tripp had unknowingly stepped onto the boundary between two worlds. George and I never told anyone, Tripp whispered. Who would believe it? But I know, wherever I go, these things still find me. I realized Tripp wasn't just a witness. He was a conduit, a soldier marked by nameless entities. Tripp's story, I recorded, is evidence of reality's fragility in the military. The barracks aren't just a place to sleep, I wrote. They are where darkness and light intersect, where entities from other realms try to touch us. I'm not afraid of them anymore, Tripp concluded, his voice low but firm. But I'll never stop trying to understand. There's something out there, and it knows my name. I felt a chill, not from the story, but from the terrifying truth it revealed. Those are my ghost stories, or whatever they are, Tripp Ainsworth finished, his voice deep and haunting. Thanks, Professor Cole, for having me tell them. Peace out. I sensed the sincerity mixed with a fear still simmering within Tripp, as if he never truly escaped the darkness. I don't know what you all think about these experiences, I mused. But for Sergeant M and Tripp, they aren't just stories. They are scars etched deep in their souls. I believe these events weren't random, but signs of a world hidden behind military reality. I was haunted by Tripp's story of Room 316. I asked him, Luke, the original narrator, told me, if the encounter with the entity was just a dream. I mean, he saw himself talking to it, like an out-of-body experience. But the room in the dream was identical to reality. That's rare. Dreams usually take us elsewhere, Luke continued, doubtfully. But Room 316? It was too real. This phenomenon could be an out-of-body experience, OBE, where Tripp's mind unintentionally crossed the boundaries of reality, touching another dimension. Regarding the 29 Palms event, the glowing woman and the shadow figure, Tripp insisted he was wide awake. George and I both saw her, he told me. She was there, radiant, then vanished. I recognized this shared sighting as strong evidence that the 29 Palms Barracks was a supernatural hotspot. Maybe that's why we went out to smoke at 3 a.m., Luke speculated. Something in the barracks kept us from sleeping. I believe the entities at 29 Palms didn't just appear. They manipulated, drawing people into their most vulnerable state. Not everyone sees supernatural phenomena. Are some people more sensitive? I wondered. Like children in folklore, seeing things adults can't. I recall a case. A child spoke of a friend in an empty room, describing details that chilled the parents. Mommy, he wears a red shirt, says he misses you, the child said innocently. The mother paled, realizing it was her father, recently deceased. I believe some soldiers, like Tripp, might possess similar sensitivity, triggered by battlefield stress or the energy-laden environment of the barracks. Did war open a door in their minds? I questioned. Or are the barracks, with their stories and fears, places where entities can most easily infiltrate? This is a question I am still seeking answers to. But I know Tripp and M weren't fabricating. They saw what others couldn't. Luke, regaining his narrative voice, shared a personal experience. Hearing Tripp talk, I remembered something of my own, he said. Not about ghosts, but about dreams. In the Marine Corps, I became obsessed with them. Dreams that weren't normal. I realized Luke had also been drawn into the supernatural world, albeit differently. It happened in the barracks, Luke recounted, his voice low like a whisper. I don't know why, but the dreams there were strangely vivid, like I was living in another reality. I noted that Barracks, with their history and energy, can be places where dreams and reality intersect. I didn't see ghosts or entities, Luke told me. But those dreams, they made me wonder if something was trying to communicate with me. I believe Luke, like Tripp, had unintentionally touched the boundary of another world, where hidden entities wait. Luke and Tripp's stories, I concluded, testify to the power of the military environment. The barracks aren't just for rest, I wrote. They are where the human mind is tested, where darkness and light from other realms seep in. I'm still searching for answers, I admitted, my voice troubled. But one thing is certain. What Tripp and Luke experienced wasn't hallucination. There's something out there, and it's watching us. I felt a chill, as if the darkness was listening to this very story. Luke became obsessed with dreams early in his military career. I read Freud, Jung, and countless psychology books, trying to understand why we dream, what they mean. I realized Luke wasn't just curious. He was searching for a gateway into the mind, where darkness and light intersect. Then Luke discovered lucid dreaming, he explained. That's when you know you're dreaming, while in the dream, and can control it. Lucid dreaming isn't just a technique. It's a key to unlocking the subconscious, where supernatural entities sometimes lurk. Luke explained. Instead of waking up, you can explore the dream world, fly, talk to strange characters. It's like conversing with your own subconscious. I believe these characters aren't always products of the mind. Sometimes they are something external, using dreams to intrude. Luke read Robert Wagner's Lucid Dreaming. He said just thinking about the possibility of lucid dreaming could trigger it. I was surprised by the power of intention. In the military, where the mind is always stressed, such techniques could inadvertently open dangerous doors. In Okinawa, Luke began experimenting. The book said to focus on an object before sleep, he recounted. If that object appears in your dream, it will awaken your consciousness. Luke chose his hands. Simple, always there. I recognized this choice wasn't random. Hands symbolize will, control. Every night, Luke sat on his bed, staring at his hands. Luke studied every line, scar, fingerprint, he told me. For about 60 seconds, he etched them into his mind, like a reminder. If I see my hands, I'm dreaming. I felt a chill. I knew this could attract unwanted attention from entities. Not the first night. Maybe after a few nights of practicing that silly exercise. Looking at my hands. Then it happened. I noted that Luke's persistence had unintentionally created a beacon in his mind, attracting things hidden in the dream's darkness. Luke saw himself in a towering pine forest, everything normal, until my hand suddenly flew up in front of my face, blocking the entire forest. I didn't mean to do it. It just happened. I realized this was the moment Luke's mind crossed the boundary of reality. Luke looked at his hands, and it hit him. "This is a dream," Luke said, his voice trembling slightly. He knew he was dreaming, right at that moment. I believe this moment of awareness didn't just wake Luke up within the dream. It also awakened something else, lurking in the dream space. He tried to lower his hands but did it too quickly. The forest shook as if the world was disintegrating. Everything blurred into a blinding white light. The dream collapsed. This loss of control is a sign of an unstable dream, where entities can intervene. Luke panicked, raised his hands again, focused on them. He thought of nothing else, just stared at the lines on his palms, trying to keep the dream from vanishing. I realized this action didn't just save the dream, it pulled Luke deeper into a dangerous space, where the line between mind and supernatural blurred. Luke didn't know what he had opened, but after that night, his dreams were never the same. Something was waiting for Luke in there. I suspect Luke's lucid dreaming technique had inadvertently invited an entity lurking in his subconscious. The Barracks, with its energy, is where dreams become doorways. Luke wasn't just exploring his mind, he had touched another world. I felt uneasy. If Luke continued, he might face something he couldn't return from. Luke still dreamed, still practiced. But sometimes, he wondered, the things he saw in his dreams, was it just him? I felt a cold dread, as if the darkness in Luke's dreams was listening. The hazy forest gradually reappeared, solid as reality. Luke kept staring at his hands, keeping everything stable. Listening to the story, I realized Luke had grasped the key to lucid dreaming. But he didn't yet know where that door led. Luke checked his hands for a few more seconds, wanted to be sure he was in control of the dream. Then Luke slowly lowered his hands. This time, the forest didn't shake. It was vivid, as if breathing. This control was the first step, but also an invitation to things hidden in the subconscious. Luke thought, I'm dreaming. Now what? The first thought was to fly. Free. Unstoppable. Luke realized the desire to fly wasn't just a wish. In dreams, it symbolizes transcending limits, but is also risky. Immediately, he felt himself lifting off, Luke described, his voice full of wonder. Weightless, as if he were part of the air. I believe this moment wasn't just an experience. It signaled Luke had touched a deeper level of the mind, where reality began to distort. I had flown in dreams before, Luke said. But this time was different. He controlled it. Felt like holding the whole world in his hands. He glided over the towering pines, looking down at the endless forest and mountains. This majestic scenery could be a trap, concealing lurking danger. Luke flew higher, past the clouds. But then, a thought flashed. What if I fall? Will it hurt? I recognized this fear wasn't random. In lucid dreams, negative thoughts can summon terrifying entities or phenomena. The moment that thought hit, I started falling, Luke said, his voice dropping, full of regret. Slowly at first, like floating. But then I panicked. My mind went haywire, forgot all the techniques. This panic was a weak point, opening a chance for something external to interfere with the dream. Luke braced himself, waiting for the impact with the ground. Usually he'd wake up right then. But this time, no impact. I felt a chill. The dream wasn't following normal rules, as if an invisible force was manipulating it. I passed through the ground, like a glitch in a video game, Luke described, his voice trembling. Then suddenly, I was back in the air, above the treetops, still falling. This phenomenon signals a supernatural loop, where the dream is bent by an entity toying with Luke's mind. I completely panicked, Luke said, just prepared for the next impact. But when I hit the ground this time, I shot up in bed. This abrupt transition wasn't just waking up, it was an escape from a dangerous space. Luke sat bolt upright, heart pounding, and then I heard glass shatter on the floor. I was startled. This sound wasn't random. It was proof Luke's dream had crossed boundaries, affecting the real world. Luke looked down. A water glass on the bedside table had shattered, for no reason. Nobody touched it. I believe this incident was a sign of a poltergeist effect. Energy from the dream bleeding into reality, leaving a warning. Luke didn't know what he'd done in that dream, but from then on, whenever he dreamed, He felt something watching. Luke had inadvertently opened a door in his mind, and whatever stood behind it hadn't left. Luke's dream wasn't just exploring the subconscious. It was a journey into a realm humans shouldn't enter. The shattering glass was a reminder. Some things in dreams don't want us to wake up. I felt uneasy, as if the darkness from Luke's dream was spreading. Luke looked down at his feet. Empty beer bottles were arranged around me, outlining my feet, my shins, right on the blanket. He figured Mitch, his roommate, and the recon guys must have pranked him. I felt a sense of unease. This was more than just a prank. They stacked beer bottles, like drawing Luke's shape with glass, he recounted. When he sat up, he knocked one over, clattering across the floor. Tried to stay still, but another rolled off and shattered. This chaos could be a sign of a manipulated dream, where reality distorts. I just escaped that weird dream. Now I'm furious about this stupid prank, Luke recalled, his voice still tinged with annoyance. I looked over at Mitch. The guy was dead asleep in his bunk. I recognized the anomaly. In the barracks, pranks like this rarely went so far without waking someone. Mitch! Mitch! Luke called out, his voice echoing in the dark room. He didn't move. I thought, real funny, idiot, playing this game with me. But then doubt crept in. Maybe he's just passed out drunk. I felt a chill. Mitch's silence was unnatural. Then, without warning, Luke whispered, his voice full of bewilderment. I woke up. Again. I was astonished. The dream within a dream phenomenon is a sign of an invaded mental state, where the boundary between dream and reality breaks down. Still in the barracks room, still dark, Luke recounted. Mitch was sleeping in a different position, but still out cold. But the beer bottles were gone. I noted this disappearance wasn't a hallucination. It was proof Luke was trapped in a supernatural loop. I remembered everything clearly, Luke said, his voice shaky. The forest, the fall, the beer bottles. It all felt real. But the first time waking up, that was a dream too. I believe Luke had accidentally entered a simulated space in his mind, where an entity controlled his experience. Luke panicked. Sitting in bed, he looked around, wondering, is this a dream or real? Am I awake yet? This doubt signals a mind pushed to its limits, where reality becomes unreliable. Then Luke woke up again, he said, his voice cracking with fear. The third time, still in the same room, still dark, Mitch still asleep. This repeated awakening phenomenon is rare, often linked to supernatural interference testing the human psyche. Luke sat on his bed, heart pounding. Woke up 3 times, and he didn't know which was real. Luke was scared, truly scared. Luke wasn't just dreaming. He'd been pulled into a mental labyrinth where something was lurking. Luke looked at Mitch, checked if he was breathing. He didn't even dare touch anything, afraid he'd fall back into another dream. This confusion is the entity's goal, to make humans lose faith in reality. From that night on, Luke stopped practicing lucid dreaming, he told me. Not because he didn't want to, but because he was scared. Scared of what waited in the dream. This decision might have saved Luke, but the door he opened hadn't closed yet. Luke's story is a warning. Dreams aren't just the mind. They are gateways to other realms where nameless entities wait. Luke escaped, but not everyone is so lucky. I felt a cold dread, as if the darkness from Luke's dream was listening. Luke still dreams, but now, every time he closes his eyes, he wonders, will I really wake up, or just step into another dream. I knew Luke had been marked, not by the dream, but by what hid within it. I started doubting myself, Luke whispered, his voice strained with fear. Am I losing my mind? What even is reality anymore? Luke was facing a profound crisis. When the line between dream and reality blurs, the mind becomes a battlefield. I wondered, how many more times will I have to wake up? Luke recounted, his voice trembling. The first 2 times I was sure I was awake. But now, I didn't know if I was dreaming or awake. This state, called a false awakening loop, signals supernatural interference, trapping the mind in a maze. I panicked, Luke confessed. Didn't know what to do. I decided to just go back to sleep. Whether this was a dream or real, the next time I woke up, everything would be okay. I recognized the desperation in this choice. When reality is unreliable, sleep becomes the only escape, but also risky. Finally, I woke up, Luke recalled, relieved yet still uneasy. This time, it was real. I got out of bed, went to work as usual. I believe this final awakening wasn't random. Luke escaped, but whatever pulled him into the maze might still be watching. That was my first lucid dreaming experience, Luke told me. I wanted to burn the book, swore never to try again. Too terrifying. This fear was a natural reaction, but it also showed Luke had touched something beyond his control. But curiosity, in the military, there are places where the truth is hidden, where darkness isn't just the absence of light, but also a dwelling place for nameless entities. One such place is the smoke pit, a makeshift hidden corner where soldiers gather, cigarette smoke mingling with whispers about things no one dares speak of openly. The smoke pit isn't just a few pieces of wood or stacked sandbags at a desert outpost, nor just the cold concrete area outside Hansen Barracks, Okinawa. It's a place where time seems to stop, where stories of skinwalkers, ghosts, or UFOs are told in the dark, under the flickering light of a cigarette. I once heard an old soldier say, "In the smoke pit, you don't just inhale smoke, you inhale fear too." Nowadays, when smoking bans within the barracks force soldiers to seek out hidden corners, the smoke pit becomes a sacred space. No officers, no discipline, just soldiers and the secrets they carry from the battlefield. Once, I recorded a sergeant's words. "I saw it, Professor." Its eyes were blood red, standing outside the base fence. Not human. But the smoke pit isn't just a place for storytelling. It's where supernatural mysteries converge, as if drawn by human fear. Stories of ghosts, curses, or soldiers vanishing without a trace are only told here, because elsewhere, they'd be silenced by ridicule or prohibition. Those entities know where humans are most vulnerable. In the military, speaking of supernatural phenomena during work hours is taboo. An official report about a monster or a ghost could destroy a soldier's career. I was fortunate enough to once read a classified file. A lieutenant reported ghostly laughter in the woods near Kandahar, only to be sent for psychological evaluation and never promoted. "They want us silent," he whispered to me before disappearing from the military. Therefore, the smoke pit becomes the only place for terrifying stories to be unleashed. Under the dim light of a flashlight or the moon, soldiers tell of what they saw. A faceless figure gliding through the trenches, a hiss from the void, or a comrade being dragged away in the fog. I could feel the fear in their voices. Not fear of the enemy, but fear of the unexplainable. For the storytellers, these experiences aren't just memories, but scars etched deep in their souls. I once met a Marine, eyes bloodshot, recounting seeing a tall, hairy thing standing in the Iraqi desert. It was The fire pit. Not a warm place of light, but an abyss of stories buried in the darkness of war. The fire pit. The name sounds simple, familiar to the soldiers. A place they gather under the pitch-black sky, a cigarette flickering like a faint glimmer of hope in the midst of a nightmare. But don't let its simplicity fool you. It's the boundary between the living and things not of this world. There, as cigarette smoke mingled with the biting cold air, the terrifying stories began to surface. Not laughter or memories of victory, but trembling whispers of nameless figures, screams from the void, and glowing red eyes in the night. The fire pit wasn't just a resting place. It was a doorway to experiences human reason refuses to acknowledge. A veteran once told me, "Professor, you don't understand. Some things can kill you without a gun." And I believed him. Here, in the virtual space of wartime stories, I open that door to everyone, from seasoned, battle-hardened warriors to the curious who have never heard a gunshot. But this time, we will hear the accounts of 3 soldiers who encountered the inexplicable. First is Chris, a Canadian Army veteran, whose weathered face seems to bear the mark of sleepless nights in Afghanistan. After him is Sector SOS, the alias of an American soldier with eyes that constantly dart around as if still being hunted. And finally, Uriah, a US Marine, whose voice still trembles recounting the memory. Chris begins his story in the bone-chilling cold of Kandahar province, Afghanistan, in the late 2000s. He was part of Operation Athena, Canada's contribution to the ISAF coalition, where death came not only from the enemy, but also from unseen phantoms. Chris's company was a perfect war machine. Lava 3 armored vehicles roaring like beasts, heavy Leopard tanks crushing the earth, along with engineers and logistics ready for any situation. But no one was prepared for what awaited them in the darkness. The mission lasted 4 days, sweeping villages along the Arghandab River, an arid land where the wind howled through every rock crevice like the wailing of lost souls. The first night, they stopped in the middle of the dry riverbed, a clever tactic to spot the enemy from a distance. But the enemy, this time, wasn't human. The riverbed stretched about 550 yards wide, so exposed it made Chris's heart pound for no reason.
"I feel like someone's watching me,"
he whispered to his teammate over the radio, but only received a chuckle in return.
"Just your imagination, Chris."
The defensive formation was set up like a steel fortress in the desert, tanks and Levi 3s forming an impenetrable circle, barrels pointing into the thick darkness. Inside, the logistics vehicles huddled safely, or so they thought. Guard duty was divided equally. Vehicles at the 12, 3, 6 and 9 o'clock positions took the first watch. The crew, driver, gunner, vehicle commander, strained their eyes through thermal optics, scanning every shadow, every tiny movement in the night. "See anything?" Chris's vehicle commander asked, his voice hoarse from smoke and the cold. "Not yet," Chris replied, but his hand gripped the controls tighter, sweat breaking out even though the temperature outside was below freezing. Something was moving. Not Taliban, not wild animals, but a misshapen figure, abnormally tall. Every hour, the guard rotation shifted from one vehicle to another, like a deadly dance in the desert. But around 2 a.m., Chris's thermal sight flickered.
"I swear, it's not human,"
he yelled over the radio, his voice breaking in panic. The figure stood about 220 yards from the perimeter, nearly 10 feet tall. Its body was gaunt, but its impossibly long arms reached the ground. Through the thermal sight, It didn't give off a human heat signature. It was ice cold, like a corpse walking through the desert.
Skinwalker.
Chris muttered, remembering the terrifying stories his grandfather used to tell. Chris's teammates burst out laughing over the radio.
Are you crazy? There are no skinwalkers in Afghanistan.
But the laughter died when the turret of the adjacent vehicle rotated on its own, untouched, aiming straight at the figure. Then it vanished, as if it had never existed. Ethan continued the story, his deep voice seemingly pulling listeners into a bottomless pit. That guard procedure, with its cold steel circle in the desert, wasn't just protecting them from the Taliban. It was a desperate attempt to ward off unseen phantoms, nameless entities lurking in the dark night. After the defensive perimeter was established, the infantry soldiers dismounted, hastily digging shallow fighting positions in the shadow of the LAV-3. They didn't say it, but everyone wanted to avoid the biting cold of the metal and the feeling of being trapped in that iron coffin. Over the radio, the guard schedule crackled dryly.
Group 2. Watch begins in 1 hour.
Chris, as vehicle commander, along with the gunner and driver, took the second shift. But a bad feeling had begun to grow inside him, as if tonight wouldn't be just another routine watch. Inside the LAV-3, the troop compartment was spacious but cold, the 2 rows of facing benches now empty. The infantrymen had chosen the dusty ground outside, leaving the benches for Chris and the gunner, a small luxury amidst the nightmare of war. The driver huddled in the driver's compartment, clutching his sleeping bag like a lifeline. With only an hour before their watch, all 3 decided not to sleep. Chris opened a worn-out old book, the weak flashlight beam making his shadow dance on the vehicle walls. The gunner stared at his phone screen while the driver immersed himself in the virtual world of his PSP. No one spoke, but the silence was heavy, as if someone was breathing down their necks.
You feel cold?
The gunner suddenly whispered, his voice lost in the static from his headset. Chris nodded. Though he knew this cold wasn't from the desert, it came from something else, something lurking out there. They tried to ignore it, but the air inside the vehicle began to thicken, becoming suffocating. Then, half an hour before their watch, the silence was shattered. A dull thud echoed, accompanied by a slight vibration, as if something heavy had just stepped onto the roof of the vehicle. Chris and the gunner jerked their heads up, hearts pounding.
Wind?
The driver mumbled, but his trembling voice betrayed his panic. No, it wasn't the wind. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, echoed clearly on the thick steel of the LAV-3. I've researched similar cases. That weight wasn't human, more like something not of this world. Chris and the gunner looked at each other, their eyes filled with a mixture of fatigue and fear. Probably just the sergeant coming to check, the gunner said, trying to reassure himself, but his hand had already tightened on the dagger beneath his sleeping bag. They sat up, waiting for the top hatch to pop open, waiting for the familiar shout. But nothing happened. No click of the hatch, no call, only silence. A thick, terrifying silence, worse than gunfire. Where was the thing that had just climbed onto the vehicle? Chris felt the hair on the back of his neck stand up, as if unseen eyes were drilling into him from the darkness. It didn't get off the vehicle, Chris whispered, his voice cracking in the confined space. The gunner frowned. You sure? I don't hear anything anymore. But they both knew. If it had left, they should have heard it jump down. The desert was so quiet that even the rustling of sand echoed like thunder. A sense of unease crawled over Chris, colder than the chill outside. He stood up, his trembling hand reaching for the top hatch. "I have to check," he said, though his instincts screamed at him to curl up like a child. The gunner grabbed his arm. "Don't, Chris, if it's not human." But he pushed it away, determined to open the hatch. The hatch popped open, and desert air rushed in, carrying the smell of dry sand and something foul, like the distant stench of decay. Chris stuck his head out, his eyes scanning the roof under the pale moonlight. His heart skipped a beat when he realized there was no one, nothing. Only a faint indentation on the steel, like the footprint of something that shouldn't exist. When Chris stuck his head out of the top hatch, he faced an unnervingly empty space. The vehicle roof was cold, thinly coated in dust, without a single footprint, not a breath. Only the pale moonlight shining on the soulless steel. Chris frowned, trying to push away the rising unease. It probably went towards the driver's hatch, he told himself, though deep down he knew that was unlikely. Determined not to let doubt gnaw at him further, he pushed the hatch open wide, climbing completely out, his breath misting in the cutting cold of the Kandahar night. He climbed onto the turret roof, the highest point of the Lavi 3, where he could survey the entire defensive circle. Under the dim starlight, he looked down at the driver's hatch. Empty. Not a soul, not a trace. The confusion in Chris now turned into an icy chill running down his spine. The armored vehicle was an angular block of steel with no crevices for someone to hide. He stood there, atop the turret, feeling as if the entire desert was staring at him. A tiny prey in the endless darkness. His eyes swept over the empty ground between the armored vehicles, the shallow pits where infantrymen huddled asleep, and further out, the dry riverbed, vast, silent, yet menacing. Not a movement, not a soul. Damn it, how can it not be real when I have goosebumps like this? He muttered, his breath shaky. Chris scrambled down, diving back into the vehicle through the top hatch, his face white as if he'd just seen a ghost. "There's no one out there," he said quickly to the gunner and driver. "But I swear, I heard something climb onto the vehicle." The gunner frowned. "You sure you weren't imagining things?" But Chris's eyes didn't lie. "Lock all the hatches, right now," Chris ordered, his voice low but sharp as a knife. No one objected. The clatter of locking bolts echoed in the compartment, but the tension still weighed heavily on them. What had been out there? An enemy, or something that didn't need feet to move? From that moment on, the air inside the vehicle was suffocatingly thick. All three sat in silence, ears straining for the slightest sound. Their guard shift came, and they performed it with bloodshot eyes, weapons always within reach. When it was over, fitful sleep came, but no one truly rested. Fortunately, or rather a temporary peace, no more strange noises were heard that night. Don't celebrate too soon. Things like that don't just disappear. They wait. And the next morning, an even more chilling story from the driver proved it. The company left the encampment, heading towards the first village to sweep. Infantry dismounted. Lavi 3s took up covering positions, turrets rotating slowly like the eyes of hunting owls. When the radio frequency went quiet, the driver's voice suddenly came over the intercom, trembling as if about to cry, "I need to tell you guys something." He began, his voice lost in fear. Last night, between guard shifts, he couldn't sleep. To kill time, he opened his laptop, the pale blue light from the screen illuminating his tired face. "I was watching a movie, then suddenly I felt cold. Colder than the desert," he recounted, subconsciously touching the back of his neck. Then it happened. A hand, ice-cold, bony, rested on the back of his neck. Thin, unnaturally long fingers slowly stroked through his hair, deliberately, like a caress from the grave. I felt every finger distinctly, like cold stone, he said, eyes wide with panic. He whipped around, heart pounding, certain it was Chris or the gunner messing with him. "Who's there?" "That's a sick joke," he yelled, but the cramped driver's compartment was empty. Only him, the darkness, and the cold that still clung to his neck as if it had never left. That wasn't a joke. It was the mark of something that had chosen him. Initially, Chris and the gunner just chuckled when they heard the driver's story about the icy hand. "You're just adding spice for fun, right?" the gunner growled. But his eyes flickered, remembering the footsteps on the roof the night before. They thought he was overly stressed, or that fatigue had let his imagination run wild. But when the driver looked straight at them, his eyes bloodshot and his voice trembling, "I swear I felt those fingers." Neither of them could laugh anymore. His fear was real, like a cold knife slicing through the air. In the following days, as the Lavi 3 rolled through dusty villages and barren wasteland, a strange thought began to take root in the minds of all three. They whispered among themselves, "Could it be that this thing is attached to this vehicle?" I've seen similar cases. Inanimate objects sometimes become homes for restless spirits. They argued heatedly in the cramped vehicle compartment. "Should we check its history?" Chris asked, his voice laced with doubt. Lavs were often rotated through various units in Afghanistan, and who knew how many soldiers had died inside this very machine? "Maybe their spirits are still here?" the gunner mumbled, unconsciously touching the cold steel wall. But in the end, they chose silence. "It's best not to dig," Chris concluded, his voice heavy as if bearing guilt. They feared that opening that door would awaken something best left undisturbed. Sometimes, cowardice is the only way to survive the nameless things. Strangely, as if the entity heard their fear, no more sounds or cold hands appeared for the rest of the operation. The haunted vehicle, if it truly was haunted, temporarily fell silent. Don't think it's gone. It's just waiting for its chance. From a US serviceman using the alias Sector SOS. I was in Kunar Province, Afghanistan, 2010-2011. Kunar, a harsh land with towering mountains, where danger came not only from the enemy, but also from chilling legends. Locals whispered of ghosts on the mountaintops, while American soldiers spoke of things they saw in the night, things not found in military manuals. Sector SOS continued. That night, two buddies and I were on guard duty at an observation post on a hill. Their mission was to monitor the dirt road below, a narrow path where the enemy could sneak through at any time. Under the dim starlight, the darkness seemed alive, hiding something unsettling. "Around midnight," he recounted, his voice starting to tremble, "we saw a shepherd boy leading 4 goats walking along the road." All 3 soldiers watched through night vision goggles, the green light clearly showing his small figure. "Looks normal," one teammate whispered. But then everything changed. Sector SOS took off his night vision goggles, letting his naked eyes adjust to the darkness. He blinked, and the boy vanished. "What the hell?" he yelled, his voice breaking in panic. The goats were still there, walking slowly, but no one was leading them. "I swear, he was just there!" He turned to his teammates, face pale. They tried again, putting the goggles back on. The boy reappeared clearly,
ragged clothes, holding a stick. Took the goggles off. Nothing but 4 bewildered goats. It was a clear night, Sector SOS explained. The naked eye could still see the goats, but the boy just dissolved into thin air. Ethan interjected. That wasn't an illusion. It was something only night vision could pick up. All 3 soldiers were stunned, hearts pounding in their chests. Did you see that? It's not real. One teammate stammered, but Sector SOS shook his head. No, it's real. Just not of this world. They looked at each other, daring not to say more, afraid that words might summon it back. Sector SOS still trembled, recalling, "To this day, none of us can explain that night." He sat there, eyes distant, as if the phantom shepherd boy was still standing somewhere in his memory, staring at him. What convinced Ethan of this story was that all 3 soldiers, Sector SOS and his 2 teammates, saw the same phenomenon. Individual hallucinations can be blamed on fatigue, but when 3 pairs of eyes witness the same thing, it's no longer a trick of the mind. They reported it up the chain of command, voices hesitant. We saw a boy, but he disappeared when we took off our night vision. The commander frowned, dismissing it. You guys are just tired and hallucinating. Their report was filed away, like so many other strange stories in the military, where logic must prevail, no matter how loudly the truth screams. But the phantom shepherd boy refused to rest. Rumors spread quickly through the unit, like a smoldering fire in the dark night. Did you hear? SOS really saw a ghost, one soldier whispered. Eventually, the story reached the command sergeant major, the toughest man in the battalion, and he just scoffed. Ghosts in the middle of a war? Then, a week later, like a cruel joke of fate, all 3 soldiers were ordered for a drug test. Go now, no questions asked, the sergeant barked over the radio. Sector SOS chuckled, recalling it. They thought we were high and seeing things, but all 3 of us were clean, not a drop of anything. The test results didn't extinguish the strangeness. That was the weirdest damn thing I ever encountered, Sector SOS concluded, his voice heavy. You can say I was tired, I imagined it, but all 3 of us saw it for a full 20 minutes, until the goats disappeared from view. He mentioned the Petch Valley, where the incident occurred. Locals say the wind there whispers like human voices, he said, a flicker of old fear in his eyes. I've researched it. It could be EAP, electronic audio phenomena, a type of supernatural sound. But that boy was something else, not just the wind. I didn't hear any whispering, Sector SOS admitted, but I swear, what I saw was real. Supernatural, no doubt about it. He shivered, as if the cold from that night still clung to his bones. From Uriah Steffenhagen, a former US Marine. Uriah began, his voice low but sharp. I arrived in Afghanistan in 2011, just 20 years old. He was young, but war and its mysteries had etched timeless lines into his eyes. The event took place at Camp Dwyer, Helmand Province, a large base in the middle of the desert where death and strange tales intertwined. October or November, I think, Uriah recalled. Fall arrived, the air turning cold as if foretelling something ominous. Helmand was a hotspot for both the Taliban and nameless entities. Uriah was part of the base defense force, manning guard posts along the perimeter. Each post had heavy machine guns, he recounted, and I worked the night shift. Night in Afghanistan wasn't just darkness. It was a thin veil between the world of the living and the things that lurked beyond. That night started normally. I was standing in the post, scanning the desert through the narrow slit. Just the sound of the wind and my buddy breathing steadily beside me. Peace was often a prelude to a nightmare. Uriah began explaining the communication system. Each guard post had its own radio channel. We called it the side channel. His voice dry but haunting, as if the memory still clung to him. The side channel was where unofficial whispers happened in the night. From warnings about shadowy figures in the desert to idle chatter keeping minds alert. We even told ghost stories over it sometimes. Uriah chuckled softly. Sometimes those stories aren't just jokes. That night, I was on duty at Post Delta, Uriah recounted, his eyes seemingly looking back into the darkness of the Helmand Desert. But then, a soldier at Post Hotel needed relief, and Uriah was reassigned. "Go on, kid." The sergeant clapped him on the shoulder, unaware he was sending him into a nameless nightmare. Post Hotel wasn't like the others. It was located right inside the Afghan National Army compound, Uriah described, his voice tinged with tension. Close in distance, but worlds apart in everything else. Ethan added, that kind of intersection often awakens things best left sleeping. Post Hotel sat next to the Hesco barrier, rough walls made of canvas and steel filled with earth and rock to stop bullets and shrapnel. It looked like a fortress, Uriah said. But standing on that tall watchtower, I always felt a chill down my spine, even when there was no wind. That location became significant when Uriah revealed a horrific event. Just a month or two before I arrived, he recounted, his voice dropping. An A&A truck lost control, flipped, and slammed into the Hesco wall right at the base of Post Hotel. Sudden death often leaves an imprint. Both A&A soldiers died instantly, Uriah continued, his eyes darkening. The truck tore a large hole in the wall, but no one ever fixed it. Like a scar, he mumbled. And perhaps a doorway for something to pass through. Before arriving at Post Hotel, Uriah had heard the ghost stories. Footsteps on the metal stairs at midnight, but no one there, he recounted. Then shadows flickering past the door. So fast, you think you imagined it. Teammates had whispered over the side channel, "Hotels haunted, Uriah. Be careful." But Uriah dismissed it. I didn't care. The Taliban were the real threat, not ghost stories. He gave a weak smile, but deep down, a bad feeling had already begun, like the wind whistling through the Hesco gap. Regulations were clear. Each post required 2 soldiers on duty. Always 2, Uriah emphasized, so nobody goes crazy out in the desert. But the memory of his partner on that first night at Post Hotel had faded. I can't even remember his face, he confessed, his voice tinged with confusion. That first night began quietly. Uriah stood in the post, scanning the desert through the narrow slit in the watchtower. The wind whistling through the Hesco wall sounded like someone sighing.
You hear anything?
He asked his partner over the side channel, but only got a hoarse laugh.
Just the wind. Don't freak out.
Post Hotel wasn't normal, he analyzed. The accident, the unrepaired breach, the rumors, all signs. Uriah didn't realize it yet, but he had stepped into the domain of something not belonging to the living. Uriah's first night at Post Hotel began peacefully, under an Afghan sky glittering with stars, but heavy with danger. He stood in the watchtower, the cold wind whistling through the Hesco gap, like someone groaning in the darkness. Uriah and his partner, a face he no longer clearly remembered, chatted over the side channel, their voices steady to ward off sleepiness.
See anything out there?
He asked over the radio, receiving a hoarse laugh.
Just desert and sand, Uriah.
But his eyes never left the darkness, constantly scanning as instinct dictated. Then, in a moment of distraction, his gaze flickered to the left, towards the Hesco wall torn apart by the accident. Suddenly, his heart skipped a beat. It wasn't the familiar pile of debris, but something standing there, materializing in the thick night like a silent warning. He squinted, trying to pierce the darkness. And then he saw them, two black figures, distinct as real people, standing motionless beside the Hesco breach.
Damn it.
Uriah muttered, his breath misting in the cold air. That was the first sign. Uninvited figures. Uriah tried to rationalize. Probably shadows from the ANA gates, he told himself. 220 yards away, the entrance to the ANA compound was brightly lit by floodlights. But that logic collapsed instantly. It was midnight. ANA soldiers had no reason to be gathered outside. And shadows cast from that distance couldn't be as sharp and compact as these two human shapes. What chilled him more? They stood perfectly still, motionless like statues. No movement, no breath. Like two corpses, Uriah thought, his hand tightening on his rifle grip. He called his partner.
Come here, look at this.
The other soldier stepped over, peered down.
What the?
Both were confused. Intruders, the partner whispered, his voice strained. Uriah nodded. Maybe. Or insiders. Thoughts of ghosts vanished. The real threat was far more terrifying. Uriah raised his M16, switched on his tactical flashlight. The stark white beam, cutting through the night, aimed directly at the two figures. His partner also pointed his personal flashlight at them. Shouldn't that make the shadows disappear? He asked. But Uriah shook his head, sweat breaking out despite the cold. The light hit them directly. Powerful, blinding, but the two figures didn't vanish.
They're still there!
Uriah yelled, his voice breaking with disbelief. Light breaks up natural shadows, but these weren't shadows. They were something tangible, defying physics. Uriah and his partner stood frozen, eyes glued to the two pitch-black shapes. Not fading, not distorting, they stood there, as if challenging the living. Then, as if mocking their confusion, the two figures began to move. Not walking, gliding. Like floating above the ground, Uriah recounted, his voice trembling. They slowly drifted to the left, towards the dark area under the shadow of the ANA vehicles, smoothly, steadily, without a sound. They don't have legs, Uriah mumbled, the hair on his neck standing on end. His partner grabbed his arm. See? Not human. But Uriah pushed it away, trying to cling to reason. Have to check. If it's the enemy, we're dead. He signaled, go down there. The partner nodded, gripping his weapon tightly, cautiously descending the metal stairs. His footsteps clanged loudly in the quiet night, a stark contrast to the eerie silence of the two figures. Uriah stayed on the tower, eyes fixed on the dark area, heart pounding like it would burst. A few minutes later, the partner returned, face pale. Nothing, he said, his voice hoarse. No one there, no tracks. Everything's normal. But I swear, I felt freezing cold standing down there. Uriah looked at him, then out into the darkness, knowing normal was just a lie they told themselves for comfort. After the fruitless ground check, Uriah and his partner tried to push away the horrifying memory. Probably just tired eyes, the partner mumbled, his voice trembling, as if weaving a fragile net of comfort amidst the nightmare. But that false peace didn't last. Just minutes later, as they returned to their positions, the two black figures reappeared in the exact same spot, next to the torn Hesco wall. "There they are again," Uriah hissed, heart pounding. They glided to the left, smooth, ghostly, then melted into the darkness as if they had never been there. This time, no explanation could soothe their fear. They sat there, whispering over the side channel. "Did you see? They're not human." The partner nodded, face white. "I saw, Uriah. But what the hell are they?" The confusion in his voice was like a cold wind blowing through the watchtower. Uriah decided to break the silence, keying the radio.
Post hotel here. We just saw two black figures. Didn't disappear under flashlight. Moved like they were gliding. About 15 minutes ago.
He described it in detail, his voice strained. When he spoke up, he unknowingly invited others into that nightmare. A voice crackled from another post, hesitant.
15 minutes ago. You serious?
Uriah replied.
Yeah, why?
He glanced at his watch, 3:15 a.m. His heart skipped a beat.
The witching hour.
He muttered, remembering old tales about the time spirits rise.
Indeed. The veil is thinnest around 3 a.m.
Uriah, who had always believed in ghosts, felt an icy chill run down his spine.
I think I just saw ghosts.
That night, between 3 and 4 a.m., the two black figures appeared several more times, repeating their deadly glide, like a reminder from the grave. Over the side channel, the guard posts buzzed.
I've heard footsteps at hotel before too.
A voice chimed in.
Probably the two ANA soldiers who died down there.
Another added. A consensus slowly formed. The spirits of the two accident victims still lingered, trapped near the Hesco breach. The next night, Uriah returned to Post Hotel, filled with dread. He told the story to Williams, his old partner from Post Delta. "You're crazy," Williams scoffed, his eyes sparkling with skepticism. "Switch shifts with me," Uriah pleaded. "You have to see it for yourself." Finally, curiosity overcoming doubt, Williams agreed. The second night started calmly. They took over the post, checked weapons, stood in the cold watchtower. Williams shrugged. "There's nothing here, Uriah. You imagined it." Uriah stayed silent, eyes fixed on the darkness, knowing the desert always kept its promises, even terrifying ones. Time crawled by like dripping blood. Then, right at 3 a.m., the heavy atmosphere changed. Two black figures materialized beside the Hesco wall, sharp, motionless. "Look!" Uriah hissed, pointing. They began to glide slowly, eerily, melting into the dark area under the shadow of the ANA vehicles. Williams's eyes widened, but he tried to maintain his tough facade. "Weird, yeah, but there's probably a reason." Uriah shook his head. "You saw them glide, not walk." Williams shrugged, as if logic could dispel fear. "I'm tired. Gonna catch some sleep," he said, turning away. "I got watch," Uriah replied, eyes still glued to the night. Williams wasn't convinced yet, but he didn't know he'd just crossed a line. Those figures weren't just ghosts. They were a warning. Uriah sensed it, even if he didn't dare voice it. The desert was silent, but the cold from the Hesco still seeped into their bones. Williams lay down on the bench, trying to find some rest in the cramped space of the watchtower. Uriah stood behind the machine gun, eyes glued to the pitch-black desert, his breath mingling with the wind whistling through the Hesco gap. Only a few minutes passed, just as Williams closed his eyes, when a terrifying sound ripped through the night. Bang! A dry, violent impact, like someone hitting the tower's support beam hard with a steel rod, making the whole structure vibrate. "What the hell was that?" Williams shot up, grabbing his rifle, face pale. Adrenaline surged, and both Marines snapped into combat mode. Thoughts of ghosts evaporated, replaced by the fear of a real attack. Williams scrambled down the stairs, weapon ready, scanning the base of the tower. "No one here!" he yelled upon returning, his voice strained with confusion. They tried to reassure themselves. Probably just the tower settling, metal contracting, Uriah said. But both knew it was a lie. The sound was too loud, too violent to be natural. Or something loose, Williams added, but his eyes were starting to waver, no longer certain. Williams lay down again, his breathing still ragged. But as soon as his eyelids closed, bang! The second impact echoed, fiercer, like a sledgehammer blow against steel. "Enough!" Uriah yelled, gripping his weapon tighter. Williams looked at him, eyes wide. "What the hell is going on, Uriah?" No explanation could cover the truth anymore. They keyed the side channel, voices trembling.
Post hotel here. Loud banging, like someone hitting the tower, twice now.
Other posts buzzed.
Again, we heard about the shadows. Be careful.
Fear spread through the radio waves like wildfire. Just then, Uriah realized his radio battery was dying.
Corporal, bring up a fresh battery now.
He called over the main channel, his voice urgent. A few minutes later, steady footsteps echoed on the metal stairs. Williams peered down, breathing easier when he saw the corporal appear. The corporal stepped onto the tower floor, battery in hand, but Williams suddenly asked, "Was the sergeant with you?" The corporal frowned. "No, just me. Sergeant's in the COC." Uriah turned, seeing William's face had gone ashen, his dark skin now pale as ash. "What's wrong?" Uriah asked, but Williams stumbled back, gasping for breath. I saw someone," he stammered, pointing towards the stairs. "Right behind him, following close." The corporal spun around, his face turning pale too, as if the coldness of that thing had just brushed his neck. A deathly silence fell over the watchtower. Williams had seen something the naked eye couldn't catch, a phantom follower, as clear as a living person. All three stood there, freezing, feeling as if the air was being sucked out by an invisible entity. We were terrified, and Williams believed now he saw something too real to deny. The once skeptical Marine now trembled, eyes fixed on the stairs as if fearing it would return. The corporal whispered, "I don't want to come up here anymore." The following night, Uriah flatly refused to return to Post Hotel. "I can't take it," he told his commander, his voice shaky but firm. The request was approved, and he returned to Post Delta, where the desert was still cold. But at least there were no black figures or banging steel in the night. From then on, Uriah encountered no more strange phenomena for the rest of his deployment. A fragile peace lasted a few weeks, with no further reports from Post Hotel or other posts. The fragile peace at Camp Dwyer didn't last. A few weeks later, another chilling story emerged from Post Bravo, where Kyle, a friend of Uriah's, faced the inexplicable. "Kyle told us," Uriah recalled, his eyes darkening as he mentioned that night. Kyle was sitting on the steps behind the post, a cigarette glowing in his hand, gaze idly scanning the desert. Suddenly, a small cloud of dust kicked up from an earth berm near the concertina wire, as if someone had kicked it. At first, he thought it was a jackal, Uriah recounted. Those gaunt animals often prowled around the base, howling in the night over scraps of food. "Just a dog," Kyle muttered, exhaling smoke. But then his eyes narrowed as the dust cloud didn't dissipate. It rolled down the slope. growing larger. It wasn't normal, Kyle told Uriah later, his voice trembling. The dust gathered, swirled, and before his eyes it took shape. I clearly saw legs walking, arms swinging, he said, hand clenching his cigarette like a lifeline to reality. That's indicative of an elemental entity, the desert dust its home. The figure made of dust walked across the road, slowly, clearly, then dissipated into thin air like a broken dream. I swear I wasn't imagining it, Kyle told Uriah, eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep and fear. Uriah nodded. I believe you. This place isn't normal. Besides that event, other strange things happened sporadically around the base. One time we heard loud banging on the portable toilets, Uriah recounted, like someone frantically knocking. But when we opened the door, it was empty. Then the machine guns on the berms would swivel on their own, slowly, as if guided by an unseen hand. Uriah and a teammate once sat talking, whispering about these bizarre occurrences. Afghanistan is dead land, the teammate said, his voice bitter. Thousands of years of war. Alexander, Persians, Mongols, British, Soviets, now us. Blood soaks every grain of sand. Uriah nodded, feeling a chill seep into his bones. They reached a chilling conclusion. Maybe the souls can't move on, Uriah whispered. They wander, lost, trapped in this desert. War doesn't just kill the living, it imprisons the dead. I've seen this on many battlefields. That theory was reinforced by accounts from Afghan interpreters. They told us, Uriah recalled, that they saw unreal things too. One once said by the firelight, "On quiet nights I still hear gunfire from the Soviet era, screams, explosions, even though that war ended 40 years ago." It's like the land itself is crying, the interpreter whispered, eyes distant. Uriah shivered hearing it. The sounds of battle echoing crystal clear, even though no one is out there. That's residual haunting phenomena, the memory of the land, replaying unhealed wounds. Kyle, after the night he saw the dust figure, stopped laughing at ghost stories. I saw it, Uriah, he said, his voice hoarse. That thing wasn't a dog, wasn't human. It was something in between. Uriah nodded, knowing this desert wasn't just a battlefield for the living. An older interpreter, whom Uriah respected, once sat with him under the pale moonlight, telling a story both haunting and moving. My father had a friend, he began, his eyes misting with memory, who died fighting the Soviets. Years later, he recounted, his voice trembling, people saw him walking on a Kabul road, entering his old house. Uriah listened, his heart tightening as the man continued. He went to his daughter's bedside, kissed her forehead, then vanished. That's a conscious apparition, not aimless, but carrying a final act of love. I swear it's true, the interpreter affirmed, looking directly at Uriah. He nodded. I believe you. You're not a liar. That story wasn't like the shadows or the banging. It was gentle, yet still chilling, a reminder that death doesn't always sever all ties. Uriah sighed. I wish I could have left it all in Afghanistan. But ghosts sometimes, literally, don't let go easily. When I got back to the States, he said, I thought I was free. I lived with my wife and 2 dogs in base housing, thought everything would be peaceful. But that peace was an illusion. A strange thing started happening, Uriah recounted, his eyes darkening. Every morning, I'd find my wife's shoes crossed into a T-shape right under the bedroom doorway. At first, he laughed. Probably the dogs messing around. But when it repeated weekly, the laughter died. It wasn't the dogs, It was deliberate. Always a T, always on the threshold. That's an attached object phenomenon. Something from Afghanistan followed you. I've seen this associated with such blood-soaked places. The unease didn't stop with the shoes. I never felt alone, Uriah confessed. Like someone was standing behind me, breathing down my neck. He shivered, recalling the unexplained cold in his warm house. It was there, in the shadows, always. I was scared shitless, he said bluntly, not hiding it. The fear changed him. I had to keep lights on all the time, he recounted. Couldn't step into the dark anymore for years after Afghanistan. A fear of the dark took root, like a curse from the distant desert. Particularly the hours between 3 and 4 a.m., the witching hour from Post Hotel, became a recurring nightmare. I dreaded waking up then, he said, his voice strained. I was afraid I'd see something, a shadow or worse. That time isn't random. It's linked to you from that first night, Uriah concluded, his voice firm but haunted. I have other stories. I've always believed in the unknown. He looked into the distance. I don't know what's out there, but the human brain can't comprehend everything. I just know one thing. We're not alone. I lived through it, he affirmed, hands clenched as if gripping reality. From the shadows at hotel, the dustman at Bravo, to the shoes in my house. It was all real. Uriah didn't just see them, he lived with them. And they're still there, somewhere, waiting. Uriah smiled faintly as he told him, things have gotten better in recent years. The obsession from Afghanistan gradually eased, though the memories remained like shadows lurking in his mind. He left the military, now a police officer, a job full of stress and danger. His voice steady. Even facing guns or criminals, nothing scares me more than those nights in Afghanistan. The inexplicable things, they are the real terror. Supernatural fear is different. It attacks the deepest part of the soul. Uriah nodded back, eyes distant. Exactly. You can dodge bullets, but not shadows. The fear of the unknown had scarred him deeper than any physical wound. The host of our show, a former Marine, spoke up to conclude. Thank you, Chris, Sector SOS, and Uriah, he said, his voice sincere. You bravely shared things not easy to talk about, the nightmares the desert sent. He chuckled wryly, voice laced with sarcasm. I don't know about Canada, but the US Department of Veterans Affairs definitely doesn't compensate for supernatural trauma. They don't acknowledge invisible scars, a grave mistake, as they are more real than people think. There's no disability rating for a ghost following you home, the host added, his voice bitter. Maybe there should be, but don't hold your breath. The system doesn't believe in ghosts. He sighed, hoping the storytellers had found some peace after their nightmares. He hinted about himself. Maybe one day I'll tell my story. He smirked. I saw a few things through nods, night observation devices on patrol, weird shapes gliding across the desert. But I'm pretty sure it was hallucinations. Only I saw them. Individual experiences are easily dismissed, but when multiple people witness the same thing, like Uriah or Sector SOS, it's no longer a trick of the mind. The host nodded. Exactly. Alone, it's easy to doubt, but 3 guys seeing the same thing gives you chills. The military doesn't like bullshit stories, he continued, his voice hardening. You can't go shouting about ghosts and expect anyone to believe you. Your name will go all the way up to the sergeant major, and not because you're a hero, but because they think you're crazy. Suspicion could ruin a career. To illustrate, he told a personal story, unrelated to ghosts, but showing the military's reaction to the unusual. In 2011, I came back from SEER training, he began, eyes glinting with memory. 3 weeks of survival, evasion, resistance, and escape. So harsh, I thought I wouldn't make it. When I got back to base, he recounted, his voice dropping, I was skinny, sunburned, eyes sunken. My buddies looked at me like they'd seen a ghost. You're alive. I just chuckled. Yeah, barely. The system didn't ask how I was. They just checked if I'd quit. The military doesn't care what you went through as long as you stand tall. Same with ghosts. They don't want to know as long as you do your job. But these stories from Chris, Sector SOS, Uriah, show there are things beyond training or combat. Things no one teaches you how to face. Today I will take you into another dark corner of the military, SEER training, where individuals are pushed to the brink of survival and sanity. The host, a former Marine, once explained to me, they teach you how to survive in the wild. Build shelters from branches and mud. Set traps for animals. But his voice lowered as he continued. They also teach you how to evade the enemy, and if captured, which you definitely will be, how to endure torture, how to escape that hell. A course that not only tests the body, but delves deep into the mind, where phantoms begin to rise. Suddenly, he stopped talking, his eyes lost in space, as if pulled back to the past. Thinking back now, he whispered, his voice hoarse. It was on the flight to SEER school that I saw that thing. I leaned forward, heart racing. What thing? I asked. He swallowed hard. An unidentified flying object, hovering outside the plane window, glowing brightly like a giant eye staring right at me. He corrected his earlier story. I used to say it was the trip to jump school, but no, it was Maine, through Chicago, then to that cold land. A small detail, but I know supernatural memories often distort like mist in a nightmare. SEER School in northern Maine in mid-March was a frozen nightmare. It was so cold, your breath froze right in front of your face, he recounted, his voice trembling slightly. The snow cover was 8 to 10 feet deep, like a white shroud burying all life. We built fires on the snow, he continued, stacking the wood carefully so the flame wouldn't go out. But the heat melted the snow layer beneath, forming a deep pit. I had studied similar reports, soldiers telling of strange hissing sounds echoing up from those snow pits, as if something had been awakened beneath the ice. He chuckled wryly, but his eyes were haunted. I fell into that pit, he recounted. It was night. I swung my arm to throw more wood on the fire and slipped. The snow was so deep, I hit the bottom and couldn't see the way up. My buddies had to pull me out. I pictured the scene. Darkness swallowing him, the biting cold, and the trapped feeling as if the earth wanted to keep him forever. I heard something down there, he whispered to me after the interview, like scratching on the ice. Was it hallucination, or a buried entity seeking escape? But the cold was just the beginning. The field phase was pure hell, he emphasized, his voice low like wind whistling through the forest. They didn't feed us for at least a week, maybe more. I'm not sure anymore. Hunger made me lose track of time. So hungry his body trembled, he recounted. I chewed bark, gnawed leaves, anything that looked edible. I had read reports of soldiers in similar conditions, starvation causing them to see strange figures in the woods, cryptid entities silently watching from afar, waiting for their prey to weaken. The peak of horror came when he was given food. "They threw me a rabbit," he said, his voice catching. "I had to kill it myself. Break its neck with my bare hands." Hot blood ran through his fingers, his breath mingling with the animal's final gasp. "I wasn't human at that moment," he confessed to me, eyes red. It was raw survival instinct, but I wondered, did that killing inadvertently invite something darker from the deep woods? "My muscles were cramping terribly," he continued, his voice strained by the memory. "I told the instructor and he paused, taking a deep breath. He told me to eat the rabbit's eyes." I frowned, heart pounding. "Eyes?" I repeated, incredulous. He nodded. "He said the eyeballs contained electrolytes, would help me recover." He swallowed hard, eyes distant. "I did it. I bit into it, soft, slimy, foul, and I swear when I swallowed, I heard a faint chuckle from somewhere in the woods." Was it a hallucination born of hunger, or had a demon witnessed the act and taken pleasure in it? The host's story continues to pull us into a horrifying, dark region of Seer School. He recounted, his voice trembling as if choked by memory. "The instructor threw me the rabbit head, bloody, fur matted. He looked up, bewildered, asking, 'What do I do with this now?' In response, the instructor coldly commanded, 'Suck it out.' Not a smile, not a hint of jest. I wondered if it was some bizarre ritual, a way to awaken primal instincts, or worse, to invite something from the darkness. He was serious, he affirmed, eyes darkening as if peering into an abyss. And I was so hungry I actually did it. He described the horrific scene, trembling hands tearing open the head, then sucking out the rabbit's eyeball, the foul liquid sliding down his throat. It was soft, slick, and cold, he whispered to me during the interview. I shuddered, because I knew from ancient texts, such acts are sometimes invitations for demonic entities, those who delight in watching humans fall into despair. He shrugged, his voice tinged with doubt. The instructor said eyeballs have electrolytes, but I bet it was just a sick joke they pull on every class. I wasn't so sure. In my research, I'd read about secret military rituals, disguised psychological tests to see who was strong enough, who would break. I heard something in the woods after I swallowed it, he added, like slow footsteps, but no one was there. Maybe not a joke, but a door unintentionally opened to something nameless. After Seer School, he returned to his unit in Hawaii, his body depleted, nearly 15 pounds lighter. I just wanted to relax, he said, his voice weary. He bought some sandalwood incense sticks, burned them in his barracks room to de-stress. I didn't check the regulations, he admitted with a wry smile. I should have known better. The scent wafted out, sweet, but filled with hidden meaning, like the whisper of a lost soul between the cold walls. I wondered if he had unintentionally invited something from Maine to follow him back. Trouble came swiftly. A few weeks later, during the Friday morning room inspection, he recounted, a corporal smelled the lingering incense. He sighed. You can guess the rest. His command immediately jumped to the worst conclusion. They thought I was smoking weed and using incense to cover it up, he said, voice frustrated. I'd seen this before. The military distrusts the strange, viewing everything through a lens of suspicion. But what if it wasn't incense, but a sign of an entity attached to him? The consequence was ironic. My name kept randomly popping up on the urinalysis roster for 3 weeks, he recounted bitterly. And the incense was supposed to help me relax. I pictured him sitting in his room, the faint light from the incense stick dancing on the walls, while the darkness outside seemed thicker. I stopped burning incense after that, he concluded. But I suspected. Had something already taken root in his mind, waiting for another chance to surface? He laughed loudly, breaking the heavy atmosphere. Now that I'm out of the military, I can smoke whatever I want. A light-hearted joke. But I saw the haunting still flicker in his eyes. He returned to the main topic, his voice lowering. Thank you all for sharing these stories. He promised. There will be more stories about Afghanistan in the future, from traditions to fire pit stories like these. I nodded, knowing each story was a doorway to unsolved supernatural mysteries. I'll be reading more from Tales from the Grid Square, he revealed, mentioning the book containing strange stories from US veterans. There's stuff in there that gives me chills, he told me privately, like giant legless figures in the desert or screams with no source in the woods. As an expert, I believe these stories aren't just imagination. They are vivid evidence of entities like skinwalkers, demons, or UFOs lurking in the shadows of war and training. And now, as the narrative has taken us through the cold lands of Maine, through the darkness of war and nameless entities, the host turns back to the audience, his voice warm but emotional. I really appreciate you guys being here, he said, as if looking directly at each person through the screen. Thanks for walking through these stories with me. Behind the thanks, I sensed a loneliness. He knew not everyone would believe what he recounted, yet you all stayed. He continued, his voice rising with enthusiasm. Thanks for hitting that like button, for subscribing. A simple call to action, but I saw urgency in it, as if each interaction was a small flame keeping him going, digging deeper into supernatural mysteries. Every time you guys do that, he once confided in me, I know I'm not alone facing these memories. And I understood. The stories of UFOs, skinwalkers, or demons weren't just tales, but scars he carried from his service. Then he paused, his voice dropping low like a whisper in the night. And, of course, a massive thank you to the Patreon patrons, the YouTube channel members. I pictured him in a dimly lit room, screen light reflecting on his weathered face. Your support is the backbone of this channel, he affirmed. Thanks to you, I can keep telling the stories the military wants buried. I knew he wasn't exaggerating. These strange phenomena are often erased from official records, but they live on in the soldiers' minds. If you'd like to join, he said, his voice suddenly gentle like a distant invitation, there's a link right here and in the video description. I heard a hint of hope in that statement, as if he were opening a door, not just to support the channel, but to face the unexplored darkness alongside him. Come join us, he'd told me when discussing this project, because there's so much more waiting out there. And I believe each patron is an ally in the fight against silence. With that, he concluded, his voice dropping like the wind dying down in a deep forest. I will see you all in the next one. I felt the promise in that farewell, a commitment that the terrifying stories, from footsteps under the snow to the glowing eyes of a UFO, would return. Next time, he whispered to me after the recording session, I'll talk about what followed me back from Afghanistan. And I knew the audience would once again be drawn into the irresistible vortex of fear and curiosity.